The Honourable Emma Hurst.
Thank you, Mr President. I move private members' business item number 806 standing in my name. As a warning to those in this House, this motion relates to a highly distressing subject matter. While it's uncomfortable to talk about, parliamentarians cannot afford to ignore it. We need to address the sexual abuse of animals. It's a heinous crime, often linked to child sexual assault, and yet the law is lenient on offenders and the scope of the crime itself. We need urgent action around Australia and national reforms. On Monday night, ABC 7:30 exposed shocking footage from inside a piggery in Victoria. The footage shows the routine violence and cruelty that is standard practice in pig agribusiness, but it also captured an illegal act where a male worker sexually penetrated a female pig who was confined in a sow stall and unable to escape. This man has since been charged for bestiality. This is utterly horrific but unsurprising. Sexual violation of animals is rife in Australia, and extra concern should be afforded to those animals kept in intensive agribusiness behind closed doors. The statistics about people's likelihood to have sexual interactions with animals used in farming is devastatingly high.
Thank you, Mr President. It's with great concern and utter disbelief that I rise today to address this motion put forward by the member of the Animal Justice Party. We support calls for condemning sexual abuse of animals, but we also call on Animal Justice, the Greens and the rest of the loony left to condemn the abhorrent and morally bankrupt views put forward by their darling of the Animal Justice Party, Professor Peter Singer, regarding bestiality. In recent times, Professor Singer has propagated the disturbing notion that it is acceptable for individuals to engage in sexual acts with animals under the guise of consent. This is not just morally repugnant, it is reprehensible distortion of ethical principles and a grave affront to the dignity of both humans and animals alike. In his article, Heavy Petting, Professor Singer attempted to rationalise and normalise the unspeakable act of bestiality by drawing parallels between human-animal relations and interspecies friendships. He argues that as long as an animal is involved, is not harmed, and gives its consent, such acts should be permissible. This is a ridiculous, deeply flawed and dangerous line of reasoning that ignores the inherent power dynamics at play and fails to recognise the fundamental differences between humans and animals. The very notion of animals giving consent to sexual activities is a fallacy. Animals lack the cognitive capacity to understand the implications of such actions and cannot provide meaningful consent. To suggest otherwise is not only intellectually dishonest, but also a blatant disregard for the welfare of animals. Moreover, the normalisation of bestiality poses a grave threat to society, opening the door to a host of ethical and legal dilemmas. Professor Singer's views on bestiality are not only morally indefensible, but also deeply troubling in their implications by advocating for normalisation of such deviant behaviour. He undermines the very foundation of ethical discourse and erodes the principles of respect and compassion that should govern our interactions with all living beings. We support Section 2 of the motion condemning the sexual abuse of animals. We call on the Animal Justice Party to cut all links with Professor Singer and his outrageous views, as well as the banning and removal of all publications in print, digital and video media that support and promote bestiality, consensual or otherwise. The Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party calls on the Animal Justice Party to unequivocally condemn Professor Singer's views on bestiality and stand firm in the defence of ethical principles regarding animal welfare. We must reject any attempt to rationalise or justify such abhorrent acts, especially from Professor Singer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr President. I rise to also support the motion, but also address that disturbing reality of the Animal Justice Party support for Professor Peter Singer, a man who has espoused these views around bestiality, in support of bestiality. Even as late as 2022, he was attending young Animal Justice Party meetings, polluting and perverting the minds of our youth on such views. It's a stark and disturbing irony that an organisation purportedly dedicated for advocating for animal welfare would align itself with an individual who brazenly advocates for the despicable act of bestiality under the guise of so-called zoophilia. By throwing any support behind Professor Singer, the Animal Justice Party betrays the very values they claim to uphold. The notion that Professor Singer's views on bestiality can somehow coexist with the principles of animal welfare is not only absurd but deeply disturbing. How a party that claims to advocate for the welfare of animals aligns itself with someone who advocates for their abuse is pure and simple hypocrisy and betrayal of trust and values that they espouse. So I won't mince my words. The Animal Justice Party's support for Professor Singer is a shameful betrayal of everything they claim to stand for, and I call on them now to publicly disassociate themselves with the views of Professor Peter Singer. So in conclusion, I support this motion, but I also urge all members of this House to join myself and my colleague in condemning the views of Professor Peter Singer, whose Animal Justice Parties seemingly supports. And I do once again call on the Animal Justice Party to publicly disassociate themselves with this man and anyone that espouses the views that sexually abusing animals is somehow okay.
Thank you very much.